Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining the Free Press live stream. My name is Rafaela, and I'm just so thrilled to be with you on really a tremendous and monumental day. It's Monday, and after over 730 days at war, Israel and Gaza have agreed to phase one of Trump's 20-point plan. This means the remaining hostages that Israel has been fighting to bring home for 2 years are finally going to be released. 20 living hostages are now back in Israel, and the deceased hostages will hopefully be released shortly as well. We know Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, President Trump are all in Israel to celebrate. And Trump spoke at the Knesset and received a standing ovation. And he's expected to head back to Egypt for today's summit, basically to talk about further points in the plan. There's a lot more to be determined in phase two of this peace deal and beyond this really monumentous day, such as governance in the Strip, the security force, demilitarizing Hamas, and so much more. So I'm so thankful to be joined by former Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Always good to be with Rafaela, especially on this day.
Yes. So I just want to take us a step back, actually. On the morning of October 7th, you were the first person that we called here at the Free Press, and Barry recorded her first ever episode about this topic with you. It feels like 2 decades ago. We know it's been 2 years ago. So just to get inside your mind, how are you feeling on this day?
Tremendous sense of relief, tremendous sense of awe and appreciation, but also a deep feeling of remembering who and what we've lost, and a humbling sensation of what we have yet to achieve. Because, as you know, in a Churchillian sense, this is a certain way the end of a beginning, and now the hard work starts. The hard work starts not just in Gaza of implementing the subsequent points of the 20 points of President Trump and his team, how we demilitarize Gaza, how we get Hamas to give up its guns, which is sort of the linchpin for the implementation of all the other points,
right,
which call for the reconstruction of Gaza, the entry of an international peacekeeping force, and then later addressing the Israeli-Palestinian issue in a broader sense and the regional issues. So there's that, and also a sense of hope. And I think as I've talked to people at the Free Press over the course of the last 2 years, I personally have never given up hope. There were very despondent and very dark moments. But this war, as I think it much helps not just to be sort of a person of faith, but it certainly helps to be an historian, to see it in a historical sense, to look back on today from a perspective of 50, 60, even 100 years from now, and see how historians and posterity will look back on this moment. And it's quite possible to look back at this moment as the great transformative moment in Middle Eastern and Israeli history, and that in which everything could change. If I could just sort of rant on for a little bit, is that, you know, I've lived through and written about truly events that promise to be transformative in the Middle East, whether it be the Six-Day War, the 1979 peace agreement between Egypt and Israel, the 1993 Oslo Accords, each in its way promised to create a new Middle East. And each in its way failed. And here we have another event. You know, if the Middle East, the Six-Day War was the work of generals, and the 1979 peace accord between Egypt and Israel, they came to, of course, was the work of politicians, and Oslo Accords were the work of diplomats. Here we have the work of real estate agents, real estate moguls coming
getting
the prize. And wouldn't that be ironic? But again, I think maybe there has been a fundamental change.
You feel like it's been indifferent than every other moment throughout Israeli history, where it felt like there was a potential start for a new Middle East. This is feeling different right now.
I think it's also different inside of Israel. I have a weekly column in our Yediot newspaper, and a couple of weeks ago I wrote about how this war saved Israel. And it saved Israel because everyone's talking about all the disasters of the war, and certainly the war was rife with disasters and hardship and agony. But there are also ways that the war saved Israel. We would never again allow terrorist forces to build up on our borders, for example. Never again allow our reserve forces to lapse into negligence. But most importantly, this war has taken the issue of ultra-Orthodox service in the military and more broadly ultra-Orthodox involvement in integration in the Israeli economy and taken it from a rather peripheral left-wing issue and made it a national consensus. And had that not happened, then 30, 40 years ago, 30 years from now, when about 30, 40% of the young people in the state of Israel would be ultra-Orthodox and not really employable because they hadn't learned anything beyond second grade by modern terms, the state would no longer be sustainable. And this was going to change now because of this war. This is the way we're going to look back on this war 30, 40 years ago. Let's look back on it from a strategic and diplomatic standpoint. What could possibly happen here? And basically, I'm going to reiterate some things that the president just said in his Knesset speech. You can have peace between Israel and Lebanon. Imagine what that would do for the Middle East. Just that.
Right.
Israel and Syria. What would that do for the Middle East? Peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which is not peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. It's peace between Israel and the entire Sunni world. Right. The largest Muslim countries in the world are not in the Middle East. Pakistan, Indonesia, who knows, maybe even Malaysia. Malaysia's a harder nut. You're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars in trade. You have potentially, and I don't rule this out, I think the president intimated in much of his speech, I wouldn't rule out someday peace between Israel and Iran. Not under this regime. Wow. So everything changes. Last point, if you would, and thank you for letting me go on. I'm in that kind of mood. Many years ago, during one of the many wars between Israel and Hamas and Gaza, they were all told there were 4. A prominent Israeli American editor called me and said, I get what the tactic is, but what's the strategy? And I said, you don't get it. Our tactic is our strategy. What did I mean by that? In the creation of Israel in 1948, every couple of years, enemies rise up to destroy us. And they rise up to destroy us in a way that's very rare in history, because there are very few wars in history that are truly existential wars. They're usually wars to change a government. In World War II, America didn't go to war to destroy Germany or Japan. In fact, it built them up. But these wars were actually designed to wipe us off the map. And we win these wars. And as a result of winning the wars, slowly, ineluctably, some of our adversaries conclude that it's not a good idea to try to destroy us and to make peace with us. Egypt tried it 4 times. Jordan tried it twice. And they internalized. It wasn't a good idea to try to destroy us, and they made peace. And this was true of the country, the signatories to the Oslo Accords. And so our tactic, I explained to the editor, was to win these wars one after another, and in between, to develop our society, to create what is, by any international criteria, one of the most successful nation states on earth. I think President Trump made that trip there too. It's our healthcare system, our higher education system, our infrastructure, the water that comes out of our tap, our army, our democracy. And hopefully along the line, the tactic would be eventually some people would make peace. That was our strategy. What's happened here, Rafaela, is it could be the end of our tactic, or at least a radical change in our tactic, and that our strategy will become our strategy. And the strategy will be peace. The pathos will be stability. This is not to be Pollyannish. There's going to be terror. There's going to be Islamic extremism. Iran is still a major threat. The Houthis are a threat. We have them all. But here is a fundamental change in Israel's reality, potential reality as we've known it since 1948.
Well, Trump's whole ethos has been power through strength, and he has not shied away from showing power. On top of that, as you mentioned, he brought in unlikely characters, Steve Witkoff, who people, when he was appointed, there was a million headlines about why Steve Witkoff. There was that also, ridiculous New York Mag headline, my old employer, about how Jared Kushner had read these 25 books, and it was essentially making fun of him and his ability to contribute to this conflict. Now we're on a day where this deal doesn't seem like it would have been possible without Trump, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and the like. And so I just want to get your perspective on that. Do you think any other president or any other team could have accomplished what has been accomplished in these past few days?
The accomplishment is a product of 2 factors. One is personal relations. And diplomacy is no different than just about any other human endeavor. 90% of it is human relations. And what Jared Kushner did over the course now of a decade, And what Witkoff has done over the course, really over less than a year, is establish personal relations of trust, credibility, with leaders throughout the entire region, and leaders who do not agree with one another, much less with us. Okay, you're talking about the Turks and the Qataris on one hand, and the Saudis and the Emiratis on the other, including with states outside the region, like Pakistan and Indonesia. That's invaluable. That is incalculable. It is, you can't put a price tag on that. Secondly, it's the use of power. Now, certainly in the last decade and a half, American leaders, American parties, the Democrats and the Republicans alike, have sort of vied with one another to see which was more isolationist, which could withdraw from the Middle East sooner, and which could eschew any use of military power. Got to the point where, George Bush back in 2003 sent 600,000 soldiers into Iraq, American troops into Iraq. Today, during the Biden administration, the Obama administration, it was questioned whether the United States could send 600 soldiers anywhere. 600, not 600,000. And this notion then percolated down to into the belief that soft power translated into diplomatic leverage, which frankly goes against human nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say this as a Jewish kid who grew up in a Sicilian neighborhood. Soft power doesn't do it. And what Trump did was to restore America's willingness to use power, whether first against the Houthis in Yemen, later very emphatically against Iran, against the nuclear program, to project that power, to instill in everybody in the region that America was back, to restore the Pax Americana, which had effectively collapsed over the previous 15 years. And that translated in tremendous leverage. Nobody wanted to cross Donald Trump. No one wanted to cross him.
You're drawing a direct link between the U.S.'s decision to strike key nuclear facilities in Iran to the deal that just happened yesterday and today.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't have been possible without those strikes.
It would have been much less likely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And by the way, Trump said as much in front of the Knesset.
Right. And also Israel's decision to strike in Doha against Hamas leadership.
Let's go back. Let's draw a line under that and talk about Israel's role in this too. Right now, we're talking about the United States. It's a different topic, and here it is. Now, the question is, how is America going to use this power in the coming days, weeks, and months, including that big linchpin question of how you demilitarize Gaza? Because once that happens, then major processes are set in motion. It's the reconstruction of Gaza, the re-education of the Palestinians. And yes, we're going to have to address the question of Judea, Samaria, the West Bank. It's going to be up there. We better prepare for it now, and prepare for it creatively. There is rebuilding Israel's foreign relations, and President Trump said Israel's never been less isolated. We've never been more respected. I wish that were true. We have a lot of work to do. Around the world and domestically in the United States as well.
Well, I know you only have 5 more minutes, so I just want to talk briefly about phase 2.
I have 10 more minutes, but it's okay. Good.
The more the merrier for us.
Yeah.
Hamas is still deeply embedded into Gaza.
Yes.
They still have their arms. Over the past 2 days, we've seen countless videos of Hamas terrorists taking to the street, terrorizing their own people, other Gazans from either other clans or Gazan civilians who dare to speak out against Hamas. The footage has really been brutal and gruesome to watch. Can you just tell us a little bit about what's happening on the ground in Gaza right now and the extent to which Hamas is trying to hold on to power?
If I were a terrorist in Hamas, I'd be scared. I'm scared out of my boots right now. They are degraded. They are weak. There are tens and tens of thousands of people who have deep and passionate grudges against them. And some of those people have guns. And you could see certainly internecine violence in Gaza. I think that Hamas should take the get out of jail free card and get out of Gaza, because people are going to be coming after them.
It seems
there'll be no more money coming in from the Qataris, no more arms coming into the Egyptian border. They are not going to be able to remain sovereigns for much long, because they have nothing. They cannot reconstruct. They can't rebuild Gaza. They don't have the ability. They don't even have tractors. So it's going to be very difficult. It's very important right now that among the steps taken by the Trump administration is to keep the Europeans out of this.
Hmm.
The Europeans can only cause harm in the Middle East. They will come in and they'll somehow get those tractors back there and give them to Hamas, out of probably good intentions, out of humanitarian impetus. But the idea is to keep that pressure on them, or as Netanyahu was fond of saying, keep them on the mat, keep them on the ropes. Can I say a word about Israel? Because if we are short, I'm sorry. Go ahead. That's your next question.
No, I was just going to
Yeah.
ask, do you think
Yeah.
they would actually take that offer? And the reason I say that is Barry recently interviewed Eli Sharabi, really phenomenal man. He was a former
So,
Holocaust, for those who don't know.
yeah.
And he had really so much time. He speaks Arabic, speaking to his captors. And one thing that he relayed to Barry and I was essentially this thing that we hear all the time where the Hamas terrorists were saying, it might not be me or my children or my grandchildren, but it's a multi-generational project. And so given that ideological brainwashing that is so clearly evident, do you see them actually leaving the Strip, taking this get out of jail card? It seems like it's not something they would do, but I'm curious your perspective there.
I'm doubtful because it's in their DNA.
Yeah.
It's in their DNA. In dealing with Hamas, it's unusual for us in the West, but we're dealing with an interlocutor for whom death is a logical option.
So what's the path forward then?
So maybe some would avail themselves of that, maybe some with their
Okay.
families, but others will prefer to stay and die.
Do you think the deal collapses in phase 2, or are you hopeful that there could be some?
I have to be hopeful because so far Trump hasn't let us down, and I don't see Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner just saying, "Okay, we've done this and we're going to walk away." I think the stakes are too high, and the expectations are too high. So I think that's not going to happen. A word about Israel. It's very important we talk about Israel before I go, and what Israel has gone through from that morning was like 5 o'clock in the morning. I had that conversation with Barry on October 7th. And later on, we went to the border areas. There are great lessons in this for the people of Israel and for the Jewish people worldwide. There are great lessons for this. We've been through the most traumatic periods since the Holocaust, and it's important to remember not to lose faith, not to lose sight of an optimistic end. And historians will look back on this period, not just Israeli historians. People at West Point will look back and say that the Israeli army, Israeli Defense Forces, achieved one of the great victories of all modern history, certainly against adversaries that were in many ways more daunting than any faced by any modern army in history. That's just in Gaza, 30,000 terrorists embedded in 2.2 million people with 500 kilometers of tunnels underneath them. There's never been anything like it. And that's just in Gaza. That's not in Lebanon. That's not in Iran. That's not in Yemen. They'll look back at an Israeli Air Force that conducted hundreds, if not thousands, of sorties, some of them more than 2,000 kilometers away, without losing a single airplane. And yes, the Israeli army, there was tremendous destruction in Gaza, but I've yet to see anybody come up with an alternative to the way Israel fought this war. Yeah, when every single house holds an arsenal or is hiding a tunnel or a sniper's nest, you don't send your soldiers into that house to clear it. You blow up the house. And my father, who landed on Normandy Beach and fought his way across Europe, took a lot of photographs. And Gaza looks exactly like Berlin looks like in 1945. Exactly what Hamburg looked like in 1940. That's what the city looks like when it's the site of urban warfare. Does that mean everything Israel did was perfect? No, we made egregious mistakes all the time. That happens in war. God, the mistakes made in World War II by the Allies. We're going to look back at this and see this as, in many ways, our greatest military victory and maybe potentially the truly transformative event in the history of Israel in the Middle East. Maybe. And I say this guardedly. I've lived through too many disappointments to say it, with full confidence. But really reason for hope. And there should be, in synagogues across America, and frankly in churches too, there should be a moment of thanks. A moment of reflection, of solemnity, as well as we remember all the victims of this war. And yes, there are tens and tens of thousands of victims of this war. And what are the lessons for Western civilization? one of the in another publication, Sapir, which I know you respect. I wrote an article in the last edition about, is Israel the chosen state? It was a very hard article to write at a time when the entire world was accusing, much of the world was accusing us of genocide and war crimes. And went out on a limb. And toward the end of this article, I wrote, for many other reasons, for this and many other reasons, Israel is the chosen state. But one of the chosen reasons is that we have provided the West with an example of a country that is willing to stand up and fight for itself, for what it believes in. Fight imperfectly, yes. With mistakes, yes. But what it means to have close to 400,000 citizens pick up a gun and go out and fight, that is equivalent of more than about 22 million Americans. That's like 5 million Americans more than fought in all of World War II. Yeah. What is that example to the world? And that is what we should be cognizant of today, with all the sorrow, all that. Anyway, thank you for letting me ramble. It's just a moment. It's a moment.
We so appreciate you being here. And as I mentioned earlier, you were with us from the very first day of the war until this day, and you've just been such an invaluable voice too.
I have to say one last word, and that is, I haven't mentioned the word Netanyahu here, or the name. Mm-hmm. And he too will be judged differently by history. He and Ron Dermer, to whom and to Jared Kushner, these are people to whom Jewish history will give its place. And we don't forget as a people. And many of them may be remembered very differently than they remembered, during their own time. Right. President Truman was considered a horrible president during his term. Horrible. The lowest approval ratings. We don't know. But Bibi and his team, what can I say? They have earned their place in history.
It sounds like the topic of your next book.
It is indeed.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
I'm now going to bring in two other voices that everyone here will know very well from the Free Press, Mati Friedman and Haviv Rettig. Mati is a Jerusalem-based correspondent. He writes for the Free Press, and Haviv is, of course, our Middle East analyst, also here at the Free Press. So Haviv and Mati, thank you so much for being here on really a historic and monumental day.
It's good to be here.
Thank you both. I want to start with talking about the mood across Israel, which is where you're both based. What is it like right now? Just take us into that world. People on the street, people at Hostage Square. Paint the picture of how people are feeling. We can start with Haviv.
Okay. The absolute unmitigated joy and celebration. The fundamental, I think, the goal of most Israelis, the emotional goal of most Israelis, if you step away from the policy planners and the strategy planners and pundits like us, the basic aspiration and hope was this: an end to the war, an end to all of the sacrifices. Israelis watched what was happening in Gaza. That was not something that anybody on earth avoided. And also knew the soldiers who were dying. It also knew what it meant if Hamas remains in Gaza after the war. And so there was a debate within Israel to end the war, if there's a deal, but was there a deal? Who can trust Hamas? All of that stuff was all anybody could talk about. And it was the source of tremendous tension and anxiety and fear on both sides of the divide, on the question of ending the war, continuing the war, pro-Netanyahu, anti-Netanyahu. All of it is unified suddenly. All of it is over. The hostages are back. Our great betrayal of our own people on October 7 is partially healed. Some are obviously dead. Many are obviously dead forever, but is partially healed. There are no more living Israelis in Hamas hands. And that's unmitigated joy everywhere by everybody, including people who don't like the deal itself.
Mati, is there anything you want to add to what Haviv just said?
Yeah, no, I think that's an accurate summary of what's going on. I would add I guess I would just the word unmitigated is one that I look at in the piece that we just published a few hours ago with the Free Press, where I describe the sensation that Haviv is also describing, where we've been walking around for 2 years with this sense of dread, kind of like a muscle that has been clenched since October 7th, and you kind of don't even notice that that the muscle is clenched until suddenly it relaxes, and that's what happened this weekend. You could just see, like, over the past 2 years, people, just the way people's faces looked, or the way they would walk, or the way interactions with strangers would quickly escalate, or the way people drive, which in Israel is always awful, but has been worse, I think, in the past 2 years. People have just been under tremendous strain, and something was really freed over the weekend, and to a greater extent today, when we saw the last live hostages in Gaza come back. The hostages have always been at the center of the Israeli psyche throughout the past 2 years. It's been a bit hard to understand, I think, for some Americans who just have a very different relationship to other Americans than Israelis have to other Israelis. And I think some people have struggled to understand why this is so important to Israelis. And I think many have perceived this as an Achilles heel for Israel, maybe correctly. Certainly Hamas recognized it as an Achilles heel, I think, and has ably exploited it. Israelis can't function if they have people in captivity. A big part of the society has been mobilized constantly over the past 2 years to rally for the hostages. The country is just plastered with posters of hostages with yellow flags, yellow ribbons, and this has persisted despite attempts by some on the right, including people in the government, to kind of make the hostages go away. They've been kind of an irritant in other plans that the government has had for this war, and it hasn't gone away because Israelis really can't deal with the fact that that so many Israelis have been in captivity. And polls have shown consistently over the past year that if there's a chance to end the war with the return of the hostages, but leave Hamas in power in some form in Gaza, most Israelis would take that deal. That has been consistent in polls, and it has been hard to understand. On the other side, I think for people critiquing Israel, some people have seen the hostages as kind of an excuse for, the supposed genocide that Israel was conducting, or this brutal campaign. How it's not really the reason that Israelis are going to war. This is just an excuse, but it really is the reason. And the freeing of the hostages really just releases a kind of psychological knot that has been excruciating for people over the past 2 years. But not everyone's coming back. So, we've lost almost 2,000 people in this war. We've lost almost 600 soldiers since October 7th. So 1,200 people are killed on October 7th, and we've lost another 600 or so. And there have been policemen who've been killed. There have been civilians who've been killed on the various fronts of this war. 40 or so hostages who went into Gaza alive have been killed. And in the article, I interview Rachel Goldberg-Polin, who's the mother of Hirsch Goldberg-Polin, who was taken hostage at the Nova Music Festival. He was taken without a hand, which he lost in the attack, trying to throw back a grenade. And he survived somehow in captivity for a year and was murdered in a tunnel with 5 other captives last summer, the summer of 2024. So I spoke to Rachel, and she's quoted in the article, and she says quite eloquently that she understands why Israelis and why our leaders need to tell a story with a happy ending.
Can I read?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I thought it was actually so powerful. You write, Rachel understands why Israelis, both ordinary people and leaders, need to tell themselves a story of success this week. Everyone wants a happy ending. People are tired of being sad, but an honest person will have to be happy and sad at the same time. How are we supposed to do these antithetical things simultaneously? Weep and celebrate, cry and dance. It's like walking a tightrope in strong winds, she said. Judaism does force adherents to practice this art with traditions like shattering a glass at a wedding to mourn the destruction of the temple. We have this muscle, she said. I just thought that was so beautifully put.
Yeah, Rachel has this ability to express incredibly painful things in very clear language. But what she's saying there is that, the war, what she says in the last paragraph of the story is that by 2 p.m. on October 7th, 2023, it was clear that we'd lost. There was an incredible Israeli collapse on the border. The thousands of terrorists rampaged through Israeli territory, murdered 1,200 people. They murdered 350 people at a music festival. They raped women. They kidnapped children. And her son vanished, never to be seen again. And we'd lost by the afternoon of October 7th. And in many ways, I think that's true. And what she says is that today what we're seeing is us fixing a small part of what went wrong. So we got some of the people back that we lost on October 7th, but it doesn't really feel like a victory, or it feels like a strange kind of victory. I think that, this will be argued, as Michael Oren said, by historians in coming years. But I feel that this happiness, which is very deep, and I'm trying to enjoy it as much as I can, I think it actually is mitigated because there are all these families who are looking at people celebrating in the streets, but their people aren't coming home. And they're never going to come home. And every single year on the holiday that we're about to celebrate this evening, Simchat Torah, thousands and thousands of Israelis are going to light memorial candles for people, and they're going to be doing it in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, long after everyone else has moved on. So there's a real tragic aspect of this event that I understand why it's not at the forefront of people's consciousness today, but it's very much a part of what's going on.
Absolutely. I just want to read one more segment of your piece because I think it's really illuminating. You write, for some foreign observers, the central place of the hostages in the Israeli psyche can seem puzzling. They are, after all, only one factor in a complex regional war in which Gaza is only one part, and in which the future of the entire country has been at stake. The sensitivity has been seen as a weakness and is seen that way by Hamas, which has been able to exploit it. Explain that for those who are not Israeli and who are foreign observers. Why is this whole country joyous for 20 people, given that so many have been lost in the war and so many are not coming home today? Can you just go a little deeper on that?
Sure. I mean, there are a few explanations, and actually, one I'm pretty sure I heard Haviv give about the meaning of captives and captivity in Jewish history and tradition, because this goes far back. I'm pretty sure it was you, Haviv, and I'll let you maybe explain that part of it, because of course this is not the first time that Jews have been taken captive, and there's a long intellectual tradition in Judaism dealing with it. But in a very simple way, this is a small country where people tend to know each other. It's quite a tightly knit society by Western standards, less so than it used to be because it's a bigger country than it used to be, and a changed society. But Israelis still tend to know each other and feel responsible for each other in a way that we take for granted, but which is very, very different from other countries in the West, like Canada, where I grew up, and it's very different than America, which has a tradition of individualism. So the idea that the entire country would be driven crazy by the fact that complete strangers are being held hostage, it's hard to understand. People don't really get that about Israel. It makes sense if you're here, and it's hard to figure it out if you're abroad. I interviewed in the piece a friend of mine who's been active in the what's called Mata Mishpachot, the Families Forum, which is the main body that's been running the rallies for the hostages. And I asked her, explain to me why this is so motivating for Israelis, why hundreds of thousands of Israelis have been protesting for these people on Saturday night and every single week since October 7th. And she said there's something about captivity that is just so, it's a really primitive disruption of our place. And she mentioned the Iliad, which ends with this scene where Priam asks for the body of his son Hector back because he can't bear the thought of him being held by foreigners, even though he's dead. Of course, Judaism has one of our most famous stories is the story of Joseph, who is sold into captivity and vanishes and then suddenly resurfaces, but he's so changed when he reappears that his own brothers can't recognize him. So these are very deep themes in human history, and the tragedy of someone being in captivity is very different than the tragedy of death, because death is of course irreversible. But when someone is being held captive, you have the idea that if you could only press the right button, if you only protest enough, if you can only do enough, that tragedy can be reversed. The person will come home. If you can pay enough ransom, if you can apply enough force, that person can come home. And to some extent, it's true, and we're seeing it today. Although I think it's important to remember that not everyone comes home, and even those who come home, they come home changed. The people who are coming home today are coming home changed, and they're going to be dealing with the wounds that they've sustained, physical or spiritual, for the rest of their lives. So there's, I think, a tendency to think, okay, these people are coming back, and we're rewinding the clock to October 6th. So these people have been, they were kidnapped, and now they're back home with their families, and they're smiling with their mother and their wife, and now we can all go about our lives. But no one is back. Nothing goes back. We've managed to correct some of the damage that we allowed ourselves to sustain on October 7th. But in many ways, this is a changed country, in some ways an unrecognizable country. And, we're going to be dealing with that, I think, for the next couple of years.
Haviv, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I mean, I hesitate too much to psychologize my own people, if only because I'm probably going to be pretty bad at it, but from the inside. But there is a very, very great, the Talmud calls this commandment one of the great ones, a commandment called redeeming the captives. And it goes back, I mean, it's biblical, it's foundational. Abraham goes to war to get back his nephew Lot, right, who is family that is taken captive. And there's many, many examples. And the sense among the Jews in Babylonian exile that they are this people, this contained sort of delineated people, small and vulnerable around the world, has entered into the Talmud as this very powerful commandment to redeem the captives. In the Middle Ages in Europe, in the Christian world, because Jews were willing to redeem captives, Jews were taken captives more often. And then you have this absolutely tormented debate in Jewish law and the Jewish bookshelf about whether or not the willingness to pay anything to get our captives back isn't the reason they're being held captive. And you have, when the Barbary pirates, of the southern Mediterranean coast are taking hundreds of thousands of people hostage, selling them into slavery in North Africa in the 18th and 19th centuries, or 18th and 17th centuries, the Jewish communities of Europe open these open charities that people are constantly just pouring money into to go to the Mediterranean and redeem the Jewish captives among them. And so this idea that we are a small, vulnerable people, captives, is associated deep in the DNA of any Jew who has a Jewish education, and any Jew who's living in the zeitgeist created by Jews with a Jewish education, is the sign of Jewish vulnerability. And so the Israeli response, first of all, has always been, when they take captives, to pay any price. And paying any price on October 7 came back catastrophically, because that is what incentivized Hamas to take 251 hostages. In the middle of this great massacre, they spent most of their resources pushing on this thing that the Israelis taught them are the Israelis' great vulnerability, the Israelis' great Achilles heel. And the Israeli response to hostages, for that reason, was closing ranks, circling the wagons, and building up power and demonstrating that power. If Hamas hadn't taken 251 hostages, the Gaza war would have gone differently, because Israeli psychology would have been different. It would not have been seen by Israelis as the beginning of a vast regional war to prove that Israel was a hollowed out shell and would fall. And it would not have ended with Hezbollah shattered and Iran's nuclear program destroyed. The message that the Jewish response to people taking Jewish hostages is a response to that sense that that is the paradigmatic signal of Jewish vulnerability. And so there's, now just to pull back, we're not talking again about the policymakers who have a lot of complex debates, and we can have those debates, but just what it felt like for people, that signal of vulnerability has been, I think, patched up. And the fact that the Iranians and that Hezbollah, and that I suspect the vast majority of Hamas, are regret October 7 at this moment, is the Jewish response to the taking of those hostages.
I would just add one.
Culturally, I mean.
That's such a, that I remember hearing you explain something along similar lines, which is also so interesting and such a deep thread here. And one of the more, I guess, superficial threads, but it's an important one, is that the guy who planned this entire event on October 7th was freed in a hostage swap for a single Israeli soldier when we released about 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, many of them hardcore terrorists. One of them was Yahya Sinwar. This was in 2011, unless I'm getting that wrong, in return for Gilad Shalit. So he himself, he was free because of that Achilles heel, and then he exploited that Achilles heel to drag us into this
his whole life and the whole logic. Right. The whole logic from Hamas's side is, we can show that this powerful Israel is actually very weak. And we can show that by this one thing that always brings them begging, begging to for any solution. There is some chance at this moment, Gaza's fate at this very moment, as Hamas conducts literal gun battles, running gun battles in the streets of Gaza against other Palestinian power centers, there is a chance that, in fact, those hostages are the reason the Israelis were unable to prosecute the war in the classic Israeli way of prosecuting wars, which is fast, clever, and decisive. And Hamas will actually be able to survive in Gaza and retake Gaza. And therefore, I would argue, I believe that Hamas retaking Gaza is primarily a disaster for Gaza. There is this, in the anti-Israel camp, not all pro-Palestinians are anti-Israel, but the ones who are anti-Israel there is this argument that Netanyahu boosted Hamas and boosts different factions to prevent Palestinian unity. Netanyahu once bragged about this to the far right of Israel. I think that was a political brag. I don't think that was actually his policy, but whatever. That's a debate for historians. The main point is, if boosting Hamas, people can at the same time try to argue that boosting Hamas is an attempt to ruin the Palestinian cause, but also that Hamas must emerge victorious in this war and continue to lead Gaza, because that's what victory looks like. If you think, if Netanyahu is trying to boost Hamas to destroy the Palestinian cause, maybe Hamas shouldn't be running Gaza after this war. I think it'll be hard to rebuild Gaza. I think it'll be hard to end the war. And hostages are the only advantage they had. If the Iranians had Israeli hostages, that would have been more useful to them than a functioning air force. And Hamas has demonstrated that. And I hope we have not continued to teach that. I'm so glad the war is over and Palestinians have suffered catastrophically. If the lesson the Hamas draws is take hostages next time as well, it's going to look this bad next time as well.
Well, I do want to talk about Hamas. We sort of started to get into this with Michael Oren. Obviously, part one was a bit more straightforward. Part two is quite complicated. It's disarming, it's who governs the strip, it's demilitarization and de-radicalization. As I said to Michael, there's been tons of videos about people, Hamas terrorists on the street, targeting opponents. Ahmed Fawad al-Aktib, who, has been a friend of the Free Press, has gone into more detail, reportedly 2,000 fighters, clashes with the Domush clan. But basically, the headline is that they seem to want to assert power and keep control, even though that is antithetical to Trump's 20-point plan and antithetical to lasting peace. And so I would love for you to just weigh in terms of what the next steps should be, given that Hamas does not seem willing to back down, even though it has given up the hostages. Haviv?
I think there's a lot of confusion about this in the world. I saw that the former First Minister of Scotland raged at Israel's defense minister, who said that Israel will get back to destroying the tunnels as part of the international framework. That's point 13 in Trump's peace plan that the Arab states are agreeing to and are hashing out over the next couple of days in Sharm el-Sheikh in the Sinai, and at the invitation of Egypt. The Israeli defense minister saying that is the Israeli defense minister saying we're going to continue the implementation of the Trump peace plan, and everybody from the Mehdi Hassans to all these activists and all these people who seem startlingly, frustratingly upset that the war is over. I'm not 100% sure what they thought this would look like when the war ends. The Trump peace plan demands, first of all, the reason the Israelis signed on to it, even though it's very amorphous about the disarming of Hamas, who does it, how it's done, the international stabilization forces, nobody knows what that means, who's going to send soldiers into Gaza, and if Hamas kills one Norwegian soldier, one American soldier, one Egyptian soldier, what are the chances that the Egyptians, Americans, and Norwegians are then going to stick it out in Gaza and face down Hamas, right? Nobody quite knows how to get this done. But the plan is the disarming of Hamas in Gaza and the dismantling of Hamas's governance structure in Gaza and the building in Gaza, and the word de-radicalization appears in the plan. And so really transforming Gaza, look, Gaza cannot militarily face Israel. It can't happen ever. All Gaza can do is drive into that brick wall and destroy itself repeatedly for all time. But if it doesn't threaten Israel in any way, Gaza is a place that the rebuilding could transform it into something extraordinarily beautiful. It is actually one of the most beautiful beaches on the Mediterranean. And not only that, it has natural gas in its territorial waters. There is no reason that Gaza isn't a wealthy, happy little emirate on the Mediterranean, and right, except that it is ruled by people who don't wish it so. And so I happen to think that the Trump plan can move forward, but it'll take a kind of willingness from the Arab world that we have never seen before. We've never seen an Arab world willingness to come in, clean up, de-radicalize, build out, and do that in coordination with the Egyptians and the Israelis. Those are the two borders Gaza has, and start that new day. So What happens next? Hamas has already come out of the tunnels, as you said. You know, they've been hiding in tunnels for the entirety of the war. The war's over. Now they're out of the tunnels. There are, at this moment, the last number I saw was a couple hundred. I don't know if that number is accurate. A couple hundred dead Palestinians from opposition clans, opposition groups, people who criticize them on social media. Dead Palestinians from Hamas gun battles and literally basically massacres that are happening right now in Gaza as Hamas demands the right to reassert control. And Hamas is going to have to be crowbarred out, and nobody knows how to do it.
I want to bring in or go deeper on one thing you said, which was the lack of response from mainstream media to actually two things. One, the ceasefire itself, right? For years, many people in the West were calling for a ceasefire. Now we have one, thanks to President Donald Trump and Bibi and all of the people involved. And that crowd has been quite silent. And then the second layer here is failure to even mention or talk about the infighting between Hamas and the terror that they inflict on Gazan civilians. So it's sort of two layers here. We haven't heard from Greta Thunberg. We haven't heard from Bella Hadid, any of the most prominent voices who have been critical of the war and have been calling for a ceasefire. If either of you could just jump in and sort of pull a little bit more color on, why no one cares and why no one is speaking out against Hamas or in favor of this ceasefire outside of the circles that you and I operate in.
Look, I'll just say I'll tee it up for Mati. I'm sorry. I think we're in a little bit of a delay. I apologize. Okay, I'll tee it up for Mati. There has been an argument that what the Israelis want in this war is the destruction of Gazans. The Israeli far right has talked that way, and Netanyahu has almost not talked right up until about 3 months ago when the disaster around the decision not to allow aid in and the sudden discovery that there wasn't as much aid available as they thought there was. And so there was this whole hunger crisis. And then Netanyahu finally found his way after 18 months, 20 months to begin to actually speak to the world. But Israel didn't speak. And the only people who spoke, I mean, Netanyahu literally didn't have an English language spokesman for the vast majority of this war. And the only people who spoke and claimed to speak in Israel's name were the most extreme far-right parties of the Israeli parliament. You literally can't get elected. There's no people to the right of these people in actually running in elections even. And they're the ones who spoke. And what they spoke about was the emptying of Gaza of all Gazans and the building of an annexation and settlement. And the argument about genocide, the argument about Israel's, malign intentions wasn't, this is the kind of war that we need to fight to get Hamas out. This is a disastrous war. It's a kind of urban warfare where every building, Israel announces everywhere it's going to go into throughout the war, which means that every place it goes into is massively booby-trapped. And 500 kilometers of tunnels, 600 kilometers of tunnels under a 40-kilometer territory is the entirety of Gaza, crisscrossed with these tunnels. And so there's no way to fight this war if you actually intend to remove Hamas without this level of destruction. And it's a similar level of destruction, as Michael Oren said, to Berlin 1945, because that's how dug in the Nazis were. But the argument against Israel has been, no, none of that. It's not a military. You can, by the way, hate the war. You can think it's not worth it. You can think the Israelis are evil for pursuing this strategy. But that's not the argument that they're going overboard. The argument was the only thing they're doing, and all the rest of it is just cover, was trying to annihilate the Palestinians as a people. And this deal gives Israel everything Israel wants. The hostages are back and Hamas is demilitarized. Israel signs on. The Israeli people are enormously gratified. We have a poll from a week before the deal. 70% wanted to end the war immediately if they could get the hostages back. The vast majority of Israelis, the vast majority of Israeli Jews, this is the deal they always wanted. And so it doesn't look like a genocide anymore. Genocide is an argument about intention, not an argument about how many died. And so it's the thread has to be reclaimed. They have to hold on to this grand morality play that has been running through their heads all this time, into which they have invested all of their politics. Nobody has marched in the streets of Western capitals at this scale for anything,
right?
Ever. There has never, on any issue of any kind, been this scale of mobilization. It has taken over the moral imagination of the Western left, and the Israelis are willing to settle for non-genocide. The cognitive dissonance, we're seeing people try to struggle their way through it. And that's why you get people like Owen Jones and Mehdi Hassan and I think his name is Hamza Youssef, the former First Minister of Scotland, who are just, they take a statement by the Israeli Defense Minister explaining that they're going to abide by the Trump peace plan, but they want all the parts of the Trump peace plan because that's what they signed on to, and turn it into Israel's going to continue the war, or all the bombings are about to begin again. They need all the bombings to begin again, because if the bombings don't begin again, they were wrong on the fundamental article of the great morality play. And it's weird watching these people be so traumatized by the possibility that this war is actually maybe actually over, and that the only people not currently playing the game, by the way, at this moment that we speak, Hamas has said they're not going to bring out all the bodies that they have agreed to bringing out. Hamas is currently in the only one breaking the actual deal signed by the Israelis and the Palestinians, and so that is something they're not dealing with well, and I think it speaks very poorly to their moral compass and to, frankly, just their understanding of the conflict. They've allowed themselves to be completely dragged into just a propagandistic rabbit hole that they can't even see. They can't even understand what it is that people are actually trying to get them to believe when it doesn't fit reality. I'm very disappointed in the pro-Palestinian camp. Palestinians need a lot of support.
And
This kind of pro-Hamas support is not it.
I'll just tack on, it makes people question, was ceasefire actually the goal, or was it just the destruction of Israel? Because now that there's a ceasefire, it just feels like the mask is off a little bit. And I'll just add one more thing before I go to Mati, which is this sort of sense of blinders. And I think there was one situation that really stood out to me, which was when Greta Thunberg posted a infographic on social media talking about this, supposed genocide, and she accidentally used a picture of Evyatar David, looking obviously just so emaciated, and it was
tortured and starved.
Tortured and starved, and it was like harrowing to see. And she was making the case that he was a Hamas, like a Gazan suffering. And then instead of just being like, oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, like, I'm also thinking about the hostages, she just deleted it. Like, no explanation, no.
Right. When someone explained to her that she was accidentally posted an Israeli with that exact thing happening to them by Hamas, she deletes it and walks away without saying a word. Right. It wasn't about hostages, and it wasn't about torture, and it wasn't about starvation, because if it's the wrong person facing the torture and starvation, then she has nothing to say. Exactly. And that is so powerful and telling, and the whole thing is going to collapse, because if that really is all it's about, then it really is about bigotry.
Mati, do you want to chime in here?
My experience watching the international discourse about Israel, which started when I worked for the AP about 15 years ago, was that this is not a real place in the minds of many observers, by the way, including people who love Israel. Often people who love Israel love a completely imaginary country, and people who hate Israel also hate a completely imaginary country, but the country really serves some kind of psychological purpose in which reality is basically an irritant. So people don't know really what to do with the real country and its real dilemmas. It serves some kind of deep political purpose, or it serves the purpose of mobilization. And this has been true since probably the 60s or 70s, when the global left kind of gets the idea that Israel is the avatar of everything that the left hates. So militarism, nationalism, racism, colonialism. That's when you have the Zionism is racism resolution passed at the UN in 1975. Israel's accused of genocide by Soviet representatives in the late 70s. So this has been an idea bouncing around on the left. It's been on the margins of the left for many decades. You'd find it in academic departments and kind of more obscure corners of the intellectual world. And then it really explodes in the past. I mean, certainly in the past 2 years, but it was exploding before this war. The war just made it very visible. So when people are marching in their hundreds of thousands against Israel and saying they want a ceasefire, it doesn't mean that they actually have an analysis of the actual country of Israel, or that they want an actual ceasefire. And when people say it's genocide, it doesn't mean that there is a genocide according to the technical definition of that term. These are very kind of primal ways of imagining evil and then imagining yourself to be acting against evil. And, there's nothing you can do about the fact that for many, many societies over many, many centuries, the face of evil is a Jewish face. So when people imagine evil, that evil looks like a Jew. And if you're a Christian, then the Jews are anti-Christians. And if you're a communist, then the Jews are bankers. And if you're a capitalist, then the Jews are communists. And if you're a racial purist, then the Jews are a racial pollutant. And if you're a universalist, then the Jews are tribalists. And if you're an American right, alt-right, guy, then the Jews are globalists who are kind of importing non-white immigrants. And if you're an American leftist, then the Jews are, white supremacists and fascists. So it's just a way of imagining. Basically, it's a way of understanding the world for stupid people, and there are a lot of those, and we've really seen a very, I think, frightening example of it over the past 2 years. It's really taken over big parts, as Haviv was saying, big parts of the intellectual life of the West. It has already taken over much of the Islamic world, and it's been that way for many, many years. And there's this amalgam of parts of the Islamic world, parts of which are moving into the West, physically moving into the West, finding allies among Western leftists with whom they would seem to have very little in common. But because it's not an actual discussion of an actual country, because we're talking about ideas and symbols, they find common ground, and it turns out to be something very, very powerful. And you're seeing that power harnessed for politics, for example, in the mayoral race in New York City right now, and you're seeing it in different places across the West. So we're watching something that is real and very, very frightening, but it is not about a real country called Israel and its very real dilemmas. And it doesn't matter if Israel ceases fire, because it was never about a ceasefire. It doesn't matter if Israel offered the Palestinians a two-state solution. It's never been about a two-state solution. It exists in a different sphere of human understanding, and it's I think that's increasingly clearer to many people watching it. Something is going on that is not in the realm of the rational.
I'll just tack on one thing before we move on, because you brought up the New York City mayor race. We're talking a lot about this de-radicalization that will happen hopefully in the Gaza Strip, but as we've been talking about, the issue is much broader, and there's a lot of Americans, not Palestinian, not of Arab descent, just white Americans, who are parroting Hamas talking points, essentially. And, even Zohran Mamdani's wife just yesterday posted a picture of, the guy who was colloquially referred to as Mr. Fafo, who was a Hamas terrorist. I mean, he was a cameraman. He was essentially like a content creator for Hamas. He was killed by another clan inside of Gaza, which the Post dubbed as a Israeli-backed clan. It was, sort of the twisting is really just something, but that could be, he's the likely next mayor, and that's his wife, and she's commemorating his death. So obviously it's so much larger than just the mindset in Gaza, but the mindset, to what you're saying.
It's worth saying that's a clan that has lost many dozens at least of people today, including women and children, as Hamas comes out of the tunnels and reasserts itself. And they killed the guy. And the only way that, Zohran Mamdani's wife can talk about it, and by the way, express heartbreak at it when she shared this, is to talk about it as an Israeli crime. The Dormush clan in Gaza are not an Israeli clan. Right. Israel tried to ally with various clans. These, by the way, rejected Israeli offers to ally with them in any consistent way and walked away from Israel completely. But they do want to hold on to a piece of Gaza where they live, that's where they actually live, and not allow Hamas to take them over. And that's what the gun battles are about. So the whole
that's
thing.
In the world of, that's like in the real world of Gaza, Haviv, which is not where the, this woman in New York operates. This is a symbol.
It's astonishing. If she had said that about Abu Shabab, that is literally, he talks about being allied with Israel because it's better than Hamas, he says. But the Dormush clan are not that. And right. None of this registers.
These are all, reality is really beside the point here. I mean, we kind of live in the actual country, so we think it's important. And, we probably know people who've been killed by Hamas. We think, that matters, or what Hamas is matters, but it's just a symbol of an anger at the West, or at a system that is perceived as unfair. And the symbol of the system that is perceived as unfair happens to be a state called Israel, which is the name that tends to be the symbol of what is wrong at a given time. And it's quite horrifying to see these ideas not just move from the margins of American political discourse into the center. I mean, this guy could be the mayor of a city with a massive Jewish population, but you're seeing it imported and really injected into the bloodstream of the West by immigrants from the Muslim world who are bringing it in and repackaging the obsessions of their parents and grandparents as a form of progressivism. And you'd think that that would make no sense and that people would reject it out of hand, but somehow it fits in the bizarro world of the Western left, of the academy, of the NGO world that seems to make up a big part of the Mamdani story. It's very much there, but it's completely disconnected from everything that Haviv and I cover as journalists.
It's such
the
an
journalism
odd
is not
alliance.
what it's about.
Yeah, it's such an odd alliance. There's just like 2 points that I think are really interesting that I'll just bring up before we move on, which was there was a queer man on one of these flotillas. And of course, a large segment of the flotilla was like up in arms about this, which is obviously like, being queer a central left value, antithetical to this marriage between. And then the second point is there's a very fun and interesting clip between mayoral candidate Andrew Cuomo and a everyday New Yorker, and Andrew Cuomo essentially says, like, so Oren Mamdani wants to legalize sex work, and the guy he's a Muslim man. He goes, no, Mamdani would never do that. And so I only say this to say, like, the marriage of these two groups seems one absurd, but also fragile, and we'll see how that plays out.
Right. I mean, as someone watching this from afar, I like, it's nice for a change to be able to watch other people's problems as an Israeli, but part of me wants him to win, because the contradictions that you're describing only make sense when he's not in power. And then once there's actual power and responsibility and budgets and actual, a city of 10 million people who depend on him to make decisions, then you're going to see those contradictions clash. And I think the clash will be very interesting for someone who doesn't live in New York to watch. I understand why New Yorkers might be less eager to see it play out on their streets, but the conditions, the contradictions in that movement are embodied by Mamdani.
Yes.
So it's almost as an experiment, it would be interesting to see as these people move toward power, and it's happening. I mean, it's happening certainly in the UK, where a lot of mayors are already there. It's happening in the Democratic Party. The Republicans have a different kind of problem, but these ideas are moving closer and closer to the center. And as they do, their contradictions are going to be more and more apparent, and the chaos that they bring with them is going to be also more apparent. And again, this has nothing to do with Israel, which is the country that Haviv and I cover, which has a completely different set of problems. And just to flip it around, just so we're not constantly talking about the people who don't like Israel, I have the same problem when I talk to people who love Israel and who idealize Israel about how much is wrong in Israel. So sometimes I'll talk about, for example, the fact that one of the worst parts of this war has been that we've been forced into the darkest moment in the country's history since 1948, with the worst government in our history, with a government of unprecedented incompetence. And a lot of people who idealize Israel don't really know what to do with that, because for them, it's also kind of a morality play where Israel represents something that they imagine, and the realities of the place are irritants in that way of seeing things. So it's not a problem that is limited to the people who don't like us.
Absolutely. Just to move us along, everything we're talking about is wrapped up in the broader information war. Obviously, all you have to do is look at the pictures to see that the infrastructure of Gaza is destroyed. Hamas, their weaponry is pared back to some degree. We'll know exactly how much, I think, in the coming days and weeks. But it's clear that Hamas is winning this information war. And I'm curious if you both think on this day that Hamas feels victorious, given everything that's happened, and even given the destruction of Gaza and the harm to Gazan civilians that they have inflicted.
I'll take it first. I think that we don't yet know, and Hamas itself doesn't yet know. One of the interesting things about Trump's speech in the Knesset was that he told the Israelis, he had a lot of criticism for the Israelis. He said, this was it. You're not going to achieve any more with fighting. In other words, he's explicitly saying to them, don't return to the war. You'll get nothing. You'll achieve nothing. This is how you achieve anything going forward. And there's criticism of the actual, that's an implicit criticism, but he also told them, Mazel tov, you've won. Well done. Congratulations, you've won. And one of the things that Hamas is trying to do is to show that it not only can come back out of the tunnels and reassert itself in Gaza, but literally rule Gaza, and there's no future for Gaza without it. And so everyone who has plans at Sharm el-Sheikh to figure out and coordinate a way to build a Gaza without Hamas will fail, and only with Hamas is there a future with Gaza. Gaza is now the last hostage Hamas is holding. And it's literally planning to do that. It is literally planning to prevent any capacity. There's billions of dollars that everybody wants to spend, the Saudis, Emiratis, and even the Qataris, pro-Hamas, but nevertheless sick of Hamas when the war came to Doha, are planning to dump billions and rebuild and turn Gaza into a nice place commensurate with the level of sympathy Gaza currently has in the Arab world. And Hamas is saying, not only through us, not without us. You want us to rebrand? We'll rebrand. They're trying to rebrand their forces as the Gaza Security Forces, I think they're calling them. It's a rebranding. It's the same people in the same hierarchy and the same organization. And that really is when we'll know if they, in their terms, won. They have a theory, and they learned it from Nasrallah of Hezbollah, that when you face the Israelis, you don't actually have to win. You have to, in the classic definition of win, which is force the enemy to do your bidding, all you have to do is survive. You cause the enemy terrible harm, the enemy comes after you, you survive, you've won. That is a theory based on a Muslim idea that they draw it from their Islam. It's not just a Muslim idea. They have deep faith. And so because they have deep faith that God oversees history and they and God are on the same side, all they have to do is survive, and God will eventually make sure history arcs toward the correct justice that they believe is justice. And so if they survive and the enemy can't destroy them, God will eventually sort it all out. So their job is to never stop hurting the enemy. Hezbollah called this mukawama, or resistance, but it's a specific kind of ongoing guerrilla harassing of an enemy for all time. Palestinians often talk about a kind of sumud, steadfastness, which is close to the Hebrew word tsamud, which means to cling close to something. But they explicitly use the word mukawama as well. And the whole theory is, I win only if I'm still around. And if they can retake Gaza, they're very much still around. So we don't yet know in Hamas's terms, and certainly not in Israel's terms, whether they win. I just have to say one last thing. The Israeli far right is upset with this deal because it closes the door on their fantasies of taking Gaza for themselves. But the Israeli far right isn't leaving the coalition, and it's not enraged, and it's not toppling Israeli politics and marching in the streets against the deal. And there are two reasons for that. One is they're very much part of the Jewish mainstream when it comes to getting back our hostages. But two, they genuinely think Hamas is going to ruin it all for everybody. And then they're back to their plans. And so there's already people planning, people who don't want the best future for Gazans, planning for Hamas to ruin it. And we're going to find out how much Hamas wins, how much Hamas can ruin, based on what comes out of Sharm el-Sheikh and whether the Trump, etc. One last point, Trump was asked on Air Force One if he knows about Hamas coming out of those tunnels and killing people. And his answer was very, very illuminating. His answer was, look, they're doing it with our understanding because we know that everything is shattered and somebody has to maintain order. What does that mean? Did America signal somehow through the Qataris or the Egyptians to Hamas, you can retake Gaza? Is that what just happened? Is that what Trump just said? And the simple answer is we don't know. And we don't know how much he's thought it through. And we don't know if he's just saying, yeah, we're not going to prevent them from taking over Gaza while we talk, but the treaty has to be them leaving or them disarming and a new government taking place. So everything's up in the air. We don't know who won yet because we don't know, even on the different definitions of who won, because we don't know if Hamas sticks around or not.
Well, basically, I mean, many are saying that phase 2 is going nowhere. I mean, that's, I guess, the most pessimistic read. We'll see what happens in the coming days, but everything I think you're saying, the money coming in, is all predicated on Hamas not being an existent entity in the Strip. But also, of course, they could lay low. They're already trying to rebrand. And when I say lay low, I mean lay low and then potentially reemerge. What we haven't.
A lot of people were expecting that, Rafaela. That's a really great point. A lot of people were saying, what is Hamas going to do now? Lay as low as you possibly can, come out in 2 years. When right. Gaza is stabilized, then a great deal of it is rebuilt. And there's a Gaza back, it's coming back. Don't ruin it, because Gazans are going to blame you if Arab money can't come in because of you. That's not what they've done. We've already, just in the first few hours of the peace, learned that actually, no, they're retaking immediately. They're not laying low.
So what can Israel, US, other Arab partners do to make sure that phase 2 happens? Basically, what tools are at their disposal? And I'll tack on, I've seen, some suggestions, one from Ahmed Fawad, use of surgical force against Hamas to deter, as a deterrent if they refuse to disarm, things like this. Like what should these countries do?
I think
Me?
that it's
Mati, yeah.
clear that nothing is going to happen in Gaza. I mean, none of this is going to happen. It's all, as far as Israel is concerned, I think it's all just fantasy. What Israel wanted was to get the hostages back because we can't function with the hostages in Gaza. And I think the assumption is that Gaza is going to be something like South Lebanon, where you have some Israeli military presence along the edges. You have some kind of chaotic situation where it's clear that the enemy is there underground and occasionally surfaces, and where Israel has to, act militarily on occasion, whether it's with raids or airstrikes. I think that's the only realistic future. Unfortunately, I would love to see a thriving Gaza. I'm in a kind of place like Haviv described, a little thriving little emirate of some kind on the Mediterranean that is completely removed from the people who live there, tragically for them. Destroying Hamas in Gaza, as we've seen over the past 2 years of trying and losing hundreds and hundreds of soldiers trying to do it, destroying Hamas in Gaza would mean killing or displacing every single person in Gaza. That's what it would mean. Hamas isn't 5 guys in a room. Hamas is the bulk of the population in Gaza. It's very tricky when you try to pin down the numbers, but the last time they had an election, they elected Hamas, and it's clearly a movement. It's not an organization. It's a movement that enjoys vast popularity, and it's really the only coherent political or military force in Gaza. So what you're probably going to see in Gaza going ahead is something Lebanon-esque, if possible. I think Hamas would love for there to be a veneer of something else on top of Gaza that would allow international money to come in. Just like Lebanon has a government on paper, but has never really established its control over the territory, and the power in Lebanon was always held by Hezbollah. But that's a convenient arrangement, because then the government picks up the garbage and collects taxes and presents a face to the world, while the real power is in the tunnels with Hamas. And I think that's a situation that Hamas is striving for. It's true that we don't exactly know how much harm has been dealt to Hamas, the organization. I think it's important to say, on the day that we're really celebrating here in Israel, one of the 2 war goals alongside returning the hostages was destroying the military force of Hamas, and that has not been done. Right? It hasn't been done. Hamas still exists, and they're walking around in the streets with their guns, and they're killing their opponents, apparently by the dozens as of today. So I'd love to imagine a better future for Gaza, and I'd love to imagine something that looks like Dubai or Abu Dhabi, or even Jordan would be okay, a kind of stable dictatorship. But nothing that I've ever seen from that territory or from Palestinian territories in general suggests that's a real possibility, tragically for them and possibly for us.
Well, I think the fear is that, given everything you're both saying, isn't Israel just back in the same place in 5, 10, 15 years if Hamas stays in power?
I think for Israelis, when you say 5, 10 years, that sounds amazing to us. Like for us, 2 weeks is long term. No one's expecting some kind of utopian situation that's going to last 50 years. I think if you told Israelis, listen, in 10 years you're going to have a serious threat from Hamas on your borders, Israelis at this point would say, okay, we'll start thinking about that in 9 years.
Haviv?
I think the question is, where does that place Gaza?
Right.
If Gaza chooses is such a strange word with Hamas. Yes, Hamas has the most powerful story, and Hamas ran the schools for 17 years, and Gaza's half its population is under 18. And so Hamas has taught Gazans almost everything they know about religion and the world. One of the things that Eli Sharabi, the hostage you mentioned, tells us coming out of the tunnels with his long conversations with Hamas. One of the things we got from those conversations that he had was just how isolated they are, how strangely set apart they are. There were these Hamas fighters who were part of some of his captors, who had recently seen this new crazy American movie with Leonardo DiCaprio called Titanic, and who just had no sense of what the world is like, and what people think and what Israelis believe, and that Israelis are a people. Talk about seeing us as sort of morality plays, as cartoons, as symbols. And so can a Gaza that refuses to understand that Hamas, and not just Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood generally, the ideological movement to which Hamas belongs, everything it has touched in the Middle East has shattered, has broken, is the entirety of the Middle East is one version or another of a failed state, and the only exceptions to that are states that intelligently used massive petrochemicals, basically massive, natural gas, oil. It's always extraction economies. The only successful economies are extraction economies. And when you go to places like Saudi and Qatar and you look at those extraction economies, you discover that Westerners find the oil, Westerners extract the oil, and Westerners ship the oil. The local government basically just takes the money. And so we're in a state, we're in a region where specific kinds of ideologies and political cultures have broken the place. And Hamas represents the worst version of that going forward. And so if Gaza is trapped in a Hamas that is basically kind of thinking of, if it's the only way to survive, it'll turn Gaza into an Islamist North Korea. And okay, I wouldn't wish on my worst enemies to be ruled by Hamas. I really wouldn't. And I certainly wouldn't wish it on Gaza. And so, yes, the big question, I think, is what is Gaza's future if Hamas remains?
Haviv, Mati, any closing words that you want to leave the listeners with?
I'll give Mati the last word. It's one of the things, to go back to Rachel Goldberg-Polin, the Talmud teaches us many ways to be. We're going now into a set of holidays that are also called the joy of Torah. That's literally the name of the holiday, and you're supposed to celebrate and be happy. One of the ways that the Talmud teaches you to be happy when things are tragic and sad is exactly like she said. You break a glass to remember the exilic condition of the Jews that were scattered and were in exile, and also to remember the fall of the temple and the breaking of the order of things at the most pivotal moment in the wedding. And the Talmud says that you leave a single piece of your beautifully plastered house unplastered, so that there's just broken stone underneath. And you do these things where you build the pain into the happiness. And by recognizing the pain at the beginning of the happiness, of the joy, by acknowledging the pain, you create a space for having real joy. It's very difficult in painful, difficult times to be happy because it feels fake and it feels ignoring and it feels wrong. And Judaism's most ancient counsel in this moment, in this kind of moment, is to recognize the pain, to look at it, to see it, to never not see it. And that in itself, that acknowledgement creates the space for happiness. So our job right now is to celebrate with the families that are back together. And our job right now is to look at the fact that our enemies are far weaker than they were 2 years ago. And our job right now is to know that we will be up to the tasks that face us going forward, including dealing with Hamas. I think Gaza will see a new day because, I'm sorry for going on, last sentence. The West only got its act together after destroying itself. That's true after the 30 Years' War that produced the Peace of Westphalia and created the modern nation state as a response to catastrophic religious wars that killed every third German in the 1600s. And then, of course, the new American-led world order of peace and happiness and prosperity is basically a function of the catastrophe of World War II. I genuinely think the Middle East is sick and tired of never-ending incompetence, failure, and catastrophe. And I think Palestinians are too. And there is alongside this absolute, Mati took the pessimistic route, which is in the Middle East 98% of the time, an accurate prediction of the future. But there's a new voice in the Palestinian discourse. They don't like Israel. They're never going to like it. But the scale of the loss that is possible is so great, and the suffering is so great, and the meaninglessness of what Hamas offers is so great that there are bastions of resistance to Hamas that we've never seen before in any serious way. And so I especially in the Arab world, but also among the Palestinians. And so it might not be now the pivot. We might not have reached the tipping point, but I think there is a tipping point ahead of us, at which point things turn to the good.
Mati, I'll give you the last word.
I hope you're right, Haviv. I would just say that the challenge now for Israelis is internal. And, assuming that this war has in fact come to a close, and I'm praying that that's the case, we have major internal problems that we need to solve. Israel urgently needs a new government and a new kind of politics and a kind of new unifying story. Without that happening, I think the external threats are much less important than the internal ones. This war caught us at a moment of acute division. And the kind of leadership that we have had, unfortunately, has not used the war to unify the people, but has actually exacerbated the divisions. This is a very small country. If we don't agree on what our story is, if we don't agree on our institutions, if we don't agree on the rules, if we don't agree that we all serve in the same army and obey the same orders, we will be unable to survive. And Israel is very much at that moment where we have to make those decisions. Our leadership is not equipped to make those decisions, and we need a new leadership. There will be elections certainly within the next year, probably I think within the next 6 months, maybe. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the future of the country or the future existence of the country hinges on what happens in the next election. So I think our eyes hopefully we'll have a breathing period where we can take our eyes off the external threats and do some serious work on who we are and where we're going.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today on this really, really important day. And Mati's piece is, of course, in the Free Press. It's Bring Them Home, the call finally being answered. Haviv and Mati, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks,
Rafaela.
We're now going to bring in two really phenomenal guests, Rachel and John Goldberg-Polin. Obviously, you'll know their faces. They've been some of the most prominent and important activists in bringing the hostages home. They are the mother and father of Hirsch Goldberg-Polin, who was abducted by Hamas, who was held in captivity and who was killed last August. And still, despite that news, they continue to fight every waking hour to get every other hostage home. And we're just so grateful that you're giving us time today. So thank you for being here. I think we're not getting some of the audio, but our producers are gonna help work on that. Just give it a second. Can you guys hear me? Okay, so we can hear. Let's see. Okay, I think we got you. Can you
hear us?
Now we can hear you. Yeah, thank you so much for being.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rafaela.
I'll start with just a simple opener. It's as simple as it gets, but what are you feeling right now, today, in this moment?
You know, honestly, today is a day of relief and a day of joy and thanks and gratitude. For many families like ours, it's a bittersweet day, but it's still overarchingly for the nation. It's obviously such a relief to see these beautiful 20 hostages who are alive walking back into Israel. And yet our hearts are still heavy. There are 28 hostages, as you know, who are deceased. 4 are coming home that we know of today, but we have 24 more. And it is a very primal need of loved ones to be able to give their deceased proper, respectful burials. And so that still weighs heavily on us as a nation.
Yeah, so the listener knows, basically 4 of the deceased hostages are coming home. It's not exactly clear when the others will, and obviously the closure is so important. I watched your very powerful speech in Hostage Square about the complex emotions, as you're saying, both the joy and the sorrow, because not everyone is getting a loved one home alive. Have you talked to the other released hostages and the families, and can you give us some insight about how everyone is feeling in the aggregate overall?
So, first of all, Rafaela, I like that you started by saying you have one simple question to start. I feel like there's no such thing as simple in our lives, in Israel, in this region, but I don't know, a little bit of irony.
It was aspirational.
Yeah, exactly. Let's shoot for simple. So we have not talked today to hostages who have been released and their families. We want to give them their space. We think they deserve their space, but we've certainly talked a lot to families, first of all, of hostages who have been released in the past and met many of the hostages who were released in the past. Our story did not end personally the way we all prayed and hoped it would, but we did live for 330 days deep in this struggle, and we've stayed in it since then, so we know what the families are going through. It's a feeling and an experience that fortunately few people in the world really understand. When we see the embraces, when we see what's happening as these people walk back in, it just makes so much sense. And I'll zoom out to the national level, which is there's so much complexity, as Rachel said, loss of lives, of hostages who went into Gaza alive and were killed there, of soldiers who were killed, losses on all sides. So many people in this region have lost in these last 2 years. But there's this sense of we need to celebrate, we need to breathe, we need to feel hope. And today, it's given all of us as a nation that sense. My challenge, and I'm really picking up on what President Trump said in the Knesset today, is it's amazing that these families are being reunited. Let's not stop. Let's keep moving towards progress, towards more calm, more productivity, more prosperity, longer or permanent periods where there's no hostilities. The picture that is emerging of what maybe finally we could have is giving hope to a lot of people in the region.
I see on your shirts you still have the number 738. Obviously, it indicates the number of days that the hostages have been held, and of course still the deceased hostages. Are you going to keep it on until the very final body is brought back to Israeli soil?
This is something that I took on very early in this tragic odyssey. And I said, I will keep this on until the last hostage comes home. And so people were really shocked that at Hirsch's funeral, John and I and our girls were wearing our stickers, and people said, but you're burying him. And we said, okay, but there are 101 other human beings that are still there. We need to still be advocating for them. And I feel very committed to them. And I tragically know what it's like to get your child back in a body bag. And it is horrific. And yet in this upside world in which we find ourselves, we were the lucky ones. Here we have these 24 families, still the 4 that you mentioned before are supposed to come back today. We don't have them in our hands yet. And we need to have everyone back. And so I very much look forward to the day, please God, may it be today or tomorrow, where I can actually use my masking tape to close things, to seal things, not as my name tag.
I'll add that I'm still in all the WhatsApp groups, various WhatsApp groups of the families of hostages. And today, as hostages are coming home, I'm seeing families whose loved ones are coming home alive, writing into the group saying, Ad hachatuf acharon, until the last hostage comes home. So we've become a family, the 251 initial families of hostages. We're a smaller family now, but the battle cry among the hostage families is, we don't stop until every one of them comes home, and we're going to keep on going.
I think a lot of people will find it in some ways hard to relate if they have lost a child. And I don't know how many people could find the strength. So how do you find the strength to do what you're doing?
Well, a lot of it is very fake and artificial. And we appreciate that people have that impression of us. John had a manager years ago where he worked who said, act like you want to be. And so, meaning she said, if you want to be a manager, start acting like a manager. And I remember thinking, I want to try to be strong. So the way to start being strong is to act, put on your strong costume. And look, every single day is a challenge, but we feel that there's a bigger purpose here. And I think that we have become part of this cohort of hostage families, and we have to keep trying to go toward the light and trying to keep limping forward. And it is an arduous, painful challenge, but we're moving. Some days it's a centimeter and some days it's moving backwards, but we're really trying.
Mhm. I think
You know,
oh, sorry, please.
I was going to keep adding on. I was going to add that there's a real lesson that I'm taking away from this experience. And President Trump has several times talked publicly about the influence of seeing the masses on the streets in Israel calling for the release of these hostages as something that really impacted him and made him push harder and harder. And my lesson in this is, I cannot tell you how many times in 738 days I've said to myself, or we've said to each other, why are we doing that? Why are we standing on that corner? Why are we marching in 100-degree heat? Why are we fill in the blank? And the reason that we and hundreds of thousands of others and millions around the world did it is because it works. Our actions matter. And they influence somebody, somewhere, somehow in ways that we can't comprehend while we're doing it. And it really was crystallized for me today as I'm watching these people come home. The people of Israel, the people around the world who have been doing something to raise their voice, those actions really, really mattered. And that's why we keep on going until they're all home, because it matters.
I think for a lot of people, particularly in the West, they hear about the 20 living hostages, the 48 deceased hostages, and it's sort of this number that's abstract. And sometimes it's hard to get into the detail when you see the news report of who are these people. Obviously, they all have families. Obviously, they all have people that love them so deeply. If you could just tell us a little bit about Hirsch and how you want him to be remembered. I'll just, when I was reading Eli Sharabi's book, he made a point to have a section about how Hirsch was injured so deeply on October 7th, his hand blown off, basically trying to protect other people, which just speaks volumes to his character. So,
Well, obviously, every parent's favorite subject is their children. Hirsch, first of all, will always be our eldest child. He'll always be our only son. And Hirsch will always be 23 years old. That's confusing. God willing, our daughters will continue growing up, and one day they'll be 23, and then they'll be 43, and then they'll be 93. And Hirsch will always be 23. He'll always be a curious, young citizen of the world who was so hungry to listen to people. I never understood or appreciated what a unique and remarkable trait it was to be an expert, radical, professional listener. I had no idea. But so many people have shared with us how Hirsch had this way. He was so focused, never thinking, what am I going to respond? Which I think I often find myself doing. As someone's speaking, I'm thinking, shoot, what am I going to say next? Or sometimes you're thinking, how am I going to win this debate, this battle, this battle of oration that I'm having with someone? And Hirsch was just very curious, especially to listen to people with whom he did not share the same philosophies or worldviews, which I think is so desperately lacking right now. And we have such a problem with civil discourse. And this was something that he was very intrigued by, saying, I don't have to agree with so-and-so, but I want to understand why they think the way they do. And I wonder if that's something, in his memory, we are trying very hard to figure out. How can we emulate these little shiny parts of Hirsch? And I'm very careful. I think a lot of parents who lose children start to mythologize them and lionize them, and they're perfect. And I've said many times, I'm sure that people have heard, Hirsch was not perfect. I just think he was the perfect son for me. It was this very elegant choice of the universe to say Rachel will have one son, and so this is going to be the one. And I feel that I was very imbued with blessing with him being in my life for those 23 precious years.
John, do you want to chime in?
I'm happy to. I'll chime in by adding one anecdote that I think is illuminating. My daughter and I were walking down the street in Jerusalem a couple months ago, and a stranger came over to us and said, Hirsch's dad, I want to show you something. And he pulled out his phone and showed me that his screensaver, his wallpaper, was a picture of Hirsch. And he said, every morning, the first thing I do is open my phone and I see this picture of Hirsch and I say to myself, what can I do today to be better? What can I do today to make the world better? And I walked away and said, if that's his lasting legacy, there cannot be a better legacy. And I'm proud that that's what some people are taking away.
Eli Sharabi also wrote that Hirsch told him when in captivity, and he told everyone that he had come encounter with, he who has a why can survive anyhow. And we were all blown away by this because he was 23 and Eli was in his 50s. And it's just, the wisdom it's just remarkable. Do you think about that quote in your own survival since Hirsch is murdered? And what has that quote meant to you?
Absolutely. Many times a day, I am now saying that quote to myself. And I actually say that we met Or Levy, who was held with Eli Sharabi, Elia Cohen, and Alon Ohel, who was just released today. We met Or Levy on day 496 when he had been released 5 days earlier and asked to meet with us. And he's the one who initially shared with us. Hirsch came into the tunnel. We were with Eli Sharabi and the others. And he said to us, you guys, Viktor Frankl said, when you have a why, you will find a how. What is your why? And he even said to Or Levy, your why is your son. You need to figure out how you're going to make it through this because you need to get back. This is your purpose. This is your why. And he said it repeatedly to each of them, and they've told us that upon their release, which we didn't know that. And so from day 496, it was like this jolt from beyond that Hirsch was saying also to us, Mama, Dada, you're still there. So you have a why. And it really motivated us to start limping toward that light that is so challenging for people who have loss and grief and mourning in their lives. And so we were very moved by hearing that from Eli and knowing that after Hirsch had left that tunnel, Eli and Or said that they would every single day, several times, it became a mantra for them. It became this way of continuing to live, to remind themselves, what is my why? And sometimes your why changes, right? Your why today might not be your why this afternoon or tomorrow or in a year. And that's all right. And it might be a tiny why for today. What's your, half century plan why? And it's been very moving for us. And it is a source of comfort.
It's about to be the holiday of Simchat Torah. Of course, October 7th was also on that holiday 2 years ago. Can you just talk about the symbolism for you, for the hostage families, and for Israel right now?
Yeah, so for listeners or viewers who don't know, the holiday of Simchat Torah is a joyous holiday. Simcha actually means happiness. So it's a super joyous holiday. Obviously, it was devastating 2 years ago, and there was no joy. There's been no joy since then. The country, we as individuals in the country are going to have to grapple with, how do we do this now? I can tell you, I don't know that we will ever celebrate this holiday again, or I could say we won't celebrate it with joy. In this complex world where we hold multiple truths and multiple emotions all at once, it's what we're going to have to figure out to do here. We talk a lot about how at a Jewish wedding, at the chuppah, where the actual couple is getting married, at the end of the ceremony, at the height of happiness, this new couple getting married, the Jewish custom is you take a moment, you break a glass, and you do that in memory of the destruction of the temple 2,000 years ago, but really as a symbol of things we've lost, prices we've paid, etc. And so we as a people, we have a sense already of mixing the highest of joy and the depths of despair. And it's something that now modern day Israel, modern day Jews are going to have to continue to figure out, particularly on this day. This year, it's way too early to know, but it's going to be an ongoing struggle to balance those things.
And I'll just add on to that, that one of the things that we do during this holiday of Sukkot, on the Shabbat that falls in that holiday, is we read the book of Ecclesiastes. And that's where we have the famous quote that there have been songs and poetry about there's a time for everything, there's a season for everything, there's times when you're supposed to weep, there's times when you're supposed to dance, time when you're going to be born, time when people are going to die. And Ecclesiastes, who we say is written by King Solomon, who was exceptionally wise, was saying all of those times are what make up life. Our challenge at this moment is that we're actually being asked to experience those specific times simultaneously. And that is very difficult as a nation, as a people, to say, embrace these families that, thank God, are finally getting their children back, and embrace these families that are finally getting their children back in body bags. How do we hold those two?
And embrace these families who have lost loved ones in captivity,
Right.
soldiers, the people of the region. Like,
it's endless. And so how do we juggle all of these balls of various weight and volume and size? And yet we have the capacity to do it. We have been endowed with those abilities, and it might be challenging, but I say, let's go for it. Let's face the challenge.
Well, we just have the utmost respect and admiration for you both, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this with the Free Press on a very important and monumental day. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Bella, we appreciate it.
Be well.
Well, next we're going to bring on our final guest, Nimrod Palmach. Just a note, Nimrod is a major in the IDF reserves who fought Hamas at several locations in the south of Israel on the morning of October 7th. So when many people were fleeing away from kibbutzim, he was running towards the action, basically to try to fight and save people. He told his story on Honestly the weeks after October 7th. And he's also the founder of Neuraz Leadership Academy in Israel. So Nimrod is joining us from Jerusalem. Thank you so much for being here. Again, I think we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty with the sound. Let's see, Nimrod, can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
There we go. Okay.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here again.
As I mentioned, you fought on October 7th. And so what are you feeling in this moment 2 years later?
For me, it's some kind of a closure. Actually, today morning, I took myself and I drove south without an actual meaning. I just wanted to be there as a closure. It happens to be that day that 20 hostages were released, and I could see the chopper up in the air, bringing them back home. And it was such an emotional moment for me. Being there that day, discover October 7th as the day progressed was a meaningful experience for me, a very bad one, of course. And today, exactly 2 years after, to see that we have some kind of a closure when the last alive hostage is coming back and the rest, hopefully in the next few days, in a reality that is broken, it's quite a closure and a relief.
For people who maybe weren't following the Free Press or Barry at that time, can you just remind us and give us a little bit more detail about what you were doing on the morning of October 7th and what that day looked like for you?
Sure, very quickly. I was one of the first responders to actually get to the Gaza envelope communities on the morning and to stay alive. One of these stories. The first junction or place that I got to, I was entered in Hamas ambush, was Alumim Junction, which became the junction of my life from so many reasons. On the morning of October 7, I got called from my commander. I was called to my unit very early in the day. I was supposed to be deployed in Jerusalem. After knowing very, very little, only from few videos that I've got, I decided, after confronting my commander, I defied his orders, I disobeyed his orders, and I traveled down south all by myself, carrying only my pistol with me. Halfway there, my ex-wife called. She gave me it was like an unveiling part of a film that you see everything. She just gave me about everything that happened in Kibbutz Nir Oz. And she asked me to go and save her boyfriend with his two little girls. And I was just driving as fast as I could, realizing every moment that goes by, Hamas are killing people. I left a video for my kids saying goodbye in a junction nearby the fire zone, only because I knew it will be my last day of life. And ever since, 2 years after, every day is like a gift, especially with my family, my kids, but also on a more personal and achievement level. Every day is a gift. I said goodbye to my family. I left my phone in my pocket. And I knew that when the IDF will find my body, they will find my phone, and my kids will have a farewell goodbye film for me that will hopefully be relevant when they will grow and do things in life and achieve things in life. Imagine that my kids back then were 6 and 4, haven't done anything yet, haven't went to school, college, first kiss, achievements, haven't drafted the IDF, and in every moment in their life, I want to be with them. So that's why I left this film. And I managed to cross army and police checkpost only to get caught in Hamas ambush outside of Kibbutz Alumim. Together with few soldiers, we destroyed all the terrorists there, almost 35, I think that's the number. And we saved the community of Alumim. And after that, I went to Be'eri and took part in the liberation of Kibbutz Be'eri.
One detail, and correct me if I'm wrong, from that episode that came out, now years ago, you were getting asks to meet at some other command point, basically to go in a different direction, and you essentially said, no, I need to be there right now. Is that right?
Yeah, so I was supposed to be deployed in Jerusalem, but again, I disobeyed and I traveled south. Like John Pauline just said, our action matters. And I knew, I felt in my heart, I told myself, Nimrod, ever since you were a kid, whenever people told you no, you did yes anyway. You got into trouble, but it always brought good things. Follow your instinct, be a doer. That's what I told myself. And I just told myself, action matters. And I just drove down there by myself.
I think a lot of people don't understand in the United States the extent to how small Israel is. It's less than 10 million people, right? I mean, there's more than 10 million people in New York City on any given day. It's such a small country. And everyone knows someone who was impacted, knows someone who was killed, knows someone who was kidnapped. And I'm wondering if you could just speak to, in the days after October 7th, how you were personally impacted in your community and with people you knew who were either killed or taken.
Thank you for that question. I'll maybe answer that in few different layers. Number one is the realization of hostages. I was there all day long, fought Hamas terrorists in 2 different main locations of October 7. And only around 9 p.m., I assume that was the time, I ran outside Kibbutz Be'eri with the family. I just ran with them, protected them outside after releasing them from a safe room. And I will never forget that when we crossed the Be'eri gate, we were somewhat safe. This young boy, he was probably in his very early 20s, sits on the gravel road and he says, I can't believe she's in Gaza. I can't believe she's in Gaza. And I said, whoa, kid, what's going on? What do you mean? Who is in Gaza? And he shows me a picture of a young girl where Hamas terrorist is doing a selfie with her from inside Khan Yunis. And only then at 9 p.m., I realized for the first time, they didn't just slaughter, burn people alive, rape. They took people to Gaza, into the dungeons of Hamas in the tunnels. And it was striking. When the days went by, 2 things happened. Number one, we realized how many people were dead on this deadly attack. And second, how many people were taken to Gaza. And to understand the impact of what it says that we have 256 Jews and non-Jews in Gaza. The second thing on the trauma level, for me, it was right away. October 8th, 8 a.m., while I'm recruiting my company, I'm building an army for the war. I called a psychologist I know, and I just told her, as blunt as I can get, I was there yesterday. I've seen things that no one should see, and I want to make sure I'll be a good father in a few years. I want to take care of myself. What should I do? And here I am. Sorry, yes.
Can you just give a little bit more color on what you saw specifically that made you pick up the phone and say, we need essentially therapists and psychologists and PTSD experts? Because I think a lot of people in America have really tuned it out, like maybe not Jewish Americans, but a lot of Americans generally are not interested in knowing what happened on that day. And I think it's so important for people to know. So can you give us just a little bit more on what you saw that made you make that call?
Yes. Alumim Junction, in a radius of 150 meters around me, there is 56 bodies. 22 are Nepalis and Thai workers, and the other ones are Israelis that fled from the party. Most of them are young, dead in different ways. Some of them were executed by gunshot. I remember each one of the bodies, process, how they died exactly. I remember each one. By the way, at that moment, I chose to take pictures and to document everything that I see, which, by the way, in the future led me to use these pictures for many reasons, especially to do a closure for families, but also to combat anti-Semitism and lies against Israel. I knew that the narrative on October 8th will immediately attack Israel. And here I have many evidence in my phone, including for sexual assaults. The first moment that I jumped from the car in Kibbutz Alumim Junction, I landed on a body of a young girl. She was 100%, she was attacked and she was executed. And again, around me, there is so much blood and people dead in so many different manners. And in Kibbutz Be'eri, it's a different show. Kibbutz Be'eri, it's a small Holocaust to go from one house to another and to see an old man that was killed with a hammer and an old woman that was killed with a knife. And the knife is next to her head still, covered with blood. And full family, parents and 3 children. And on and on and on. And just a body on the street that I until today, I will never know who were they. So many of them that I've seen on the streets of Be'eri. I even saw, I forgot the name in English. It's like, it's a tool that you work in the garden and you take leaves.
Like a rake.
Rake, yeah. And I saw a rake with a human scalp on it in Kibbutz Be'eri. While I'm walking, very concentrated, very focused with my weapon, like I was taught, into a house, on my way to a house, and I'm scanning with my eyes always to see enemy, and suddenly I see a wreck with a human scalp on it.
Nimrod, I just want to jump in, just because we're having a little bit of connectivity issue. We're just going to fix it really quickly for you because I think it's so important to get the exact story that you're telling us. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Yeah. Do you have a mic plugged into the computer at all? No, it's okay. I just want to make sure there's no loose cords just because what you're telling us is so important and we just want to make sure we get every moment of it. I think he's just going to sort that tech and he'll be right back on in just a second. We're going to get him right back up. So. Okay, let's see. We'll see if that's a little bit better. Thank you so much. It's always, with the tech. Okay, so you're seeing people raking. If you could just take it from there.
Sorry?
If you could just, you cut out a little bit during the moment where you were talking about people were raking the leaves in the field.
What I'm saying, I haven't seen people working with the rake. What I've seen is while I was walking towards the house, I was very focused, a soldier, an officer, like I was taught, holding my weapon, looking straight towards the enemy. And I was scanning with my eyes, looking to the sides, and suddenly I see a wreck with a human scalp on it, just laying there in the garden of someone's house. So this is kind of things that I had to see throughout the day. By the way, for full 2 months, I confronted my memory, telling myself it cannot be. You didn't really saw a wreck with a human scalp. Can you hear me now? Sorry.
I think we're gonna pause the live stream really briefly so we can really fix this. Apologies, Nimrod, and for those who are listening, we're just gonna pause and we'll be right back.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for staying with us through that bit of technical difficulty. We apologize for that. We just really wanted to work it out because we feel like what Nimrod has to say is just so important. And thank you to Nimrod for bearing with us through these tech challenges. I'll basically just let you pick it up where you were. When on October 7th, more specifically what you saw, the Thai and the Nepalese workers who had just been murdered and everything else.
Can you hear me okay now?
Keep talking.
Can you hear me good now?
It's a little bit better than where we were when yeah, I think let's try.
Okay, I hope it's okay. You were asking me about the trauma and the things that I've seen, and the examples that I gave from kibbutz Be'eri can sum what I felt. I've never in my life thought I'll see again a human scalp on a wreck, and for 2 months I didn't believe myself. I was asking myself, was it true? Did my memory tricking me? And eventually I saw it in one of Zaka's memoirs. Someone wrote the exact story. So I told myself, Nimrod, everything that you saw on October 7th is real, even though it's very horrific. So on October 8th, I had to start another fight. And the fight is on the what do you feel inside? How will you be 1 year from now? Post-trauma, PTSD in general, and I think it's a huge issue now in Israel. And a lot of people ask me, how do you get by? So I keep telling, Alumim Junction was the junction of my life in many bad reasons, also in good reasons. In the bad reasons, one of them is I stopped sleeping well. For example, my nights are not the same, and I think many people are. But I kept telling people, I'm not post-traumatic. Until the hostages are coming back, I am fully in trauma. There is no place yet for post-trauma. So I think now these are pivotal moments for Israel society, also in these matters, where all of us, like Rachel said, needs to choose a new why for our existence.
And your ex-wife's boyfriend that you mentioned that you went to go try and save, what happened to him?
They were saved, him and his daughters, but he shared the wall. He lived in neighbor to the Bibas family. So it's an interesting thing. I was supposed to get there around 10 a.m. and the guilt will never leave me, even though it's not rational. I was stopped on the way. By the way, I haven't shared here. I was shot in the chest. I wore
Mm.
a body armor, but I still was shot.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get to Niroz back then. But today, with the help of few very great people, I've got to Niroz. I established an academy for leadership in Niroz to bring and to build the next leaders of Israel, and to build an excellency educational center in the from the ashes of Niroz, in the community, in the kibbutz. So that's how life works. I couldn't get there then. I'm trying everything that I can today.
Do you know any of the hostages that are coming home today?
No, from today, no one personally, but I
Okay.
knew from before. Yeah.
From before? Yeah. So, and what is the mood in Israel right now?
I think the sentiment is very clear. There is euphoria. People are happy and thrilled for many reasons. Number one, on the empathy level, we were all looking for the hostages to come back. The story haven't been completed yet, of course, as we know, but the sentiment is full of happiness. There is a lot of worried and sadness. I think sadness is now hitting very hard. The prices that we've paid. I think more than 900 soldiers lost their life trying with everything we've got to get to the hostages. And secondly, we've released murderers before. And that's what brought us, among of the reasons that brought October 7. What will come next? These are not peace activists that we released from jail. These are people that dedicated their life to orchestrate and build and execute terror attacks against innocent civilians around the world. So
You spoke just briefly about Nir Oz. 1/4 of the kibbutz's residents were killed or taken hostage that day. It was a similar story for all the kibbutz along the Gaza border. And now people are trying to rehabilitate the community. Why? Why go back to those communities?
first of all, empirically, there is no community that suffered like Niroz. When the last terrorist and Palestinian had left Niroz, only by then the first soldiers came. So, and like you said, 1/4 with either dead or taken to Gaza or both. And you can imagine in those hours that you simply didn't have an army. It's like a pogrom against Jews. You had Jewish community with close to 400 Hamas terrorists infiltrated in and went on a rampage of slaughter and kill. And the heroic and bravery symbols and actions that families have done are unbelievable. And not soldiers, I'm talking about grandparents, fathers, mothers, and children did heroic actions to save other people's life. And we choose to rebuild Niroz. In our eyes, Niroz was the symbol of October 7, of the massacre, of the failure, of the slaughter. But Nir Oz will be the symbol of hope, of the rehabilitation, of the resilience. That's what we believe. And that's why we chose, together with the community of Nir Oz, to build the Academy for Leadership, to build an opportunity to bring 25 young adults, optimistic, brave, to rebuild this community and to boost the energy in the community. And from the office, for example, of the academy, you can see the Kedem family house where 2 parents and 3 little girls were murdered on October 7th. So it's always there.
Always there. I think the big question looming on everyone's mind is sort of what comes next. We've been talking about that throughout this live stream, and as someone who was there that day and who, has personal connections to what happened, everyone we've spoken to has personal connections to what happened, of course, but you were in the fight of it on that day. And I just want to inquire now, are you hopeful for peace in the future?
I always hopeful for peace. That's who we are. When I was 5 in kindergarten, the songs I was taught are songs about peace. I don't believe that the people that we released today are peace activists. I don't believe that the gunmen that released the hostages today are peace men, but I do believe in energy in this world, and I do believe whenever you have a vacuum, if you won't fill it with good energy, it will end up be filled in bad energy. That's what I believe, and what Trump have done today. And when I say Trump, I mean you, America. What America have done today with the leadership in Israel and the people of Israel, like John and Rachel Poland and many other people, that's a huge shift towards peace, towards change, where in my mind, if we'll continue this way, the Palestinians will have no other choice but to jump on this train towards prosperity, towards growth, happiness and solidarity. I think eventually it will go there. We need to believe more in our leadership. That's what I think we need to do.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for leaving us with that very hopeful message. I also want to thank everyone else who was here today: Michael Oren, Haviv Rettig, Mati Friedman, Rachel and John Goldberg Poland. I just appreciate everyone so much for doing this with us. And so thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.